Few characters in classic literature capture the complexity of the human soul like Julian Sorel, the protagonist of The Red and the Black by Stendhal. Julian is young, ambitious, and intelligent. Born in a small town in rural France, the son of a carpenter, he felt the weight of his humble origins from an early age. However, he refused to accept the destiny society seemed to have laid out for him. For Julian, life had to be more than hard work and obedience. He read Napoleon as other young men read tales of heroes, seeing in him a model of ascent and power. Julian desired greatness, not out of pure greed, but because he believed greatness was the only way to escape the invisibility that surrounded him. Yet, the greatness he sought wasn't merely material. He was searching for something he couldn't quite name, something that pulsed within him like a burning desire. And so, his pursuit of pleasure manifested in various forms. The pleasure of power, the pleasure of romantic conquest, the pleasure of being admired. Julian's life began to change when he was hired as a tutor for the children of Madame de Renal, the wife of a wealthy mayor. With his beauty and intelligence, he quickly became the object of her attention. Despite his humble origins, he knew how to manipulate others' perceptions. He didn't love Madame de Renal, but he loved the power he held over her. For him, seducing her was a victory against the society that had relegated him to insignificance. However, this conquest didn't satisfy him. The pleasure of domination and seduction was intense but fleeting. Julian soon realized he needed more. He sought recognition in higher spheres and thus became involved with Mathilde de la Mole, the daughter of a marquis. Unlike Madame de Renal, Mathilde was sophisticated, cold, and calculating. Winning her over meant social ascension, but it also meant facing a new kind of psychological game. Julian dedicated himself to this new pursuit with the same intensity as always, but something began to change. He realized that the more he conquered, the emptier he felt. The pleasure he so desperately sought always seemed just out of reach, like a horizon that recedes as we approach it. At the end of his journey, Julian faced the consequences of his choices. His affair with Madame de Renal was exposed, and he was put on trial for attempting to murder her in a moment of desperation. Condemned to the guillotine, Julian had time to reflect on his life. He realized that his relentless pursuit of pleasure wasn't a search for happiness but rather an escape from himself. Julian died young, but his story remains a powerful reminder. Pleasure, when sought as an end in itself, can become a trap. It invites us to reflect on our own choices and the price we're willing to pay for what we believe will bring us happiness. What truly motivates us? This is a question neuroscience has been trying to answer for decades. When we look at Julian Sorel's trajectory, we can clearly see how he became a victim of his own brain's reward system. The pleasure we feel when we achieve a goal, whether small or grand, is mediated by a fundamental biological mechanism, the reward system. It's activated by the release of dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for creating that sense of satisfaction and euphoria. Julian experienced this every time he achieved something he desired, whether it was Madame de Renal's attention, Mathilde's admiration, or the feeling of power that came with his social conquests. But the human brain has a problem. It adapts quickly. It's like buying a new pair of shoes. At first, you feel immense happiness, but after a while they become just another ordinary item. This phenomenon is called hedonic adaptation. In practice, this meant Julian could never truly be satisfied with his victories. They were intense but fleeting. Modern research shows that the reward circuit is particularly sensitive to novelty and anticipation. This explains why Julian was constantly seeking new challenges. He wasn't content with what he already had because his brain was always asking, "And now, what's next?" Moreover, Julian was driven by something even deeper, a need for validation. Studies in psychology, like those of Abraham Maslow, suggest that after meeting basic needs, humans begin to seek esteem and self-actualization. For Julian, being seen and recognized was more important than any physical pleasure. He wanted to feel that his existence had meaning, that he mattered. However, this relentless pursuit created a vicious cycle. Every time Julian achieved a goal, he quickly felt dissatisfied and set off in pursuit of the next one. The reward system, instead of being a tool for well-being, became a trap that kept him in constant motion, never allowing him to find peace. In our daily lives, we can see this same mechanism at work in behaviors like social media addiction. Every like, comment, or notification activates the reward circuit, creating a cycle of seeking more. Just like Julian, many people today are trapped in a cycle of immediate but empty pleasure that prevents them from finding lasting satisfaction. Even more concerning is how this cycle can lead us to neglect the things that truly matter. Julian, in his pursuit of pleasure and validation, destroyed relationships, manipulated people, and in the end, lost everything. He is a tragic example of what can happen when we let the reward system control us, rather than using it as a tool to seek something greater. But if Julian had understood how his brain worked, could he have made different choices? This question leads us to another perspective, that of philosophy. In the next chapter, we'll explore how thinkers like Epicurus and Schopenhauer can help us better understand the pursuit of pleasure and its consequences. The pursuit of pleasure is as old as humanity itself. Since the earliest philosophers, this question has been widely debated. Is pleasure the path to happiness, or is it merely an illusion that keeps us in an endless cycle of dissatisfaction? Julian Sorel, in his obsession with achievements and validation, is a perfect example to understand how philosophy approaches pleasure. Take Epicurus, for instance. Often misunderstood, Epicurus didn't advocate for the reckless pursuit of pleasures but rather for a balanced life based on simple pleasures and the absence of pain. He believed that true pleasure came from tranquility and the absence of suffering. Julian, however, did the opposite. He sought grand, intense pleasures, believing they would fill the void he felt. Another philosopher who helps us understand Julian is Arthur Schopenhauer. For Schopenhauer, life is characterized by a constant cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. We desire something, strive to achieve it, and once we have it, we realize it didn't bring the happiness we expected. Julian is a tragic example of this. He desired social ascension, power, and love, but upon achieving each of these goals, he discovered he still felt empty. This philosophical perspective is particularly relevant in the contemporary world. We live in a society that encourages us to seek the next big pleasure, the latest smartphone, the perfect vacation, the ideal relationship. But as Schopenhauer pointed out, this pursuit often leaves us more frustrated than fulfilled. Rubem Alves also offers an interesting reflection on pleasure. He said that the excess of options and stimuli leads to a kind of anesthesia of the soul. Julian, in his constant search for something more, never had time to appreciate what he already had. He was always so focused on the next goal that he forgot to live in the present. And what about Nietzsche? He warned us about the danger of living according to external values imposed by society. Julian wanted the recognition of a society that despised him for his humble origins. His pursuit wasn't genuine, it was an attempt to prove his worth to others. Nietzsche would encourage us to seek authentic pleasure, born from our own values, not from the approval of others. These philosophical reflections show that pleasure, when pursued recklessly or for the wrong reasons, can become a trap. Julian is proof of this. He dedicated his life to a pursuit that, in the end, left him more empty and lost than ever. But to better understand what led Julian down this path, we need to look at the psychological and emotional aspects of his story. In the next chapter, we'll explore how factors like self-esteem, trauma, and social validation shaped Julian's trajectory and how these same issues affect our lives today. If we return to Julian Sorel's story, we can see that his relentless pursuit of pleasure wasn't just about ambition but also a deep psychological need. He didn't just want to conquer, he wanted to be seen. This need for social validation is one of the main drivers behind human behaviors that often border on self-destructive. In psychology, this can be explained by Carl Rogers' theory of self-esteem. Rogers argued that we all have a fundamental need to be accepted and valued by others. In Julian's case, his self-esteem was intrinsically tied to his ability to impress and be admired. He felt that his worth was directly linked to his achievements. This phenomenon is amplified by what social psychologists call social comparison. Julian lived in a deeply hierarchical society where status and social position defined a person's value. He constantly compared himself to the nobles and the powerful, feeling inferior because of his humble origins. To compensate for this feeling of inferiority, he threw himself into a relentless pursuit of validation. In neuroscience, we can understand this behavior through how the brain processes rejection and social acceptance. Studies show that rejection activates the same areas of the brain associated with physical pain. In other words, being ignored or devalued literally hurts. Julian, in trying to avoid this pain, constantly sought situations that provided the opposite, the euphoria of acceptance and recognition. But there's a cruel irony in all of this. The pleasure Julian experienced from being recognized was always temporary. The human brain is programmed to seek more and more stimulation, a phenomenon known as hedonic tolerance. Over time, what was once exciting becomes normal, and we need something bigger to feel the same thrill. Julian lived in this cycle. Each conquest quickly lost its luster, and he needed a new challenge to maintain the feeling of pleasure. In our daily lives, we see this same pattern in many people. Think of someone constantly on social media, seeking likes and comments, or someone always buying new things but never feeling fully satisfied. Like Julian, these people are trapped in a cycle of external validation, where their worth is defined by what others think of them. Psychology also helps us understand the role of trauma and childhood experiences in this type of behavior. Julian grew up in an environment where he was constantly despised by his family. This early rejection shaped his self-perception and his need to prove his worth to the world. He wasn't just seeking pleasure, he was trying to heal wounds. Finally, neuroscience shows us that the human brain has a limited capacity to handle frequent rewards. When we're exposed to constant stimuli, whether it's social recognition, material pleasure, or even romantic love, our reward system can become dysregulated. This leads to compulsive behaviors, as we saw in Julian, who was willing to risk everything to maintain his sense of superiority and validation. But what can we learn from this? Psychology teaches us that true self-esteem cannot be built on the approval of others. Julian, unfortunately, never realized this. His pursuit of validation was, in fact, an escape from himself. In the next chapter, we'll explore how this dynamic plays out in our daily lives, from our interactions with friends and family to the pressures imposed by modern society. We'll see how the pursuit of pleasure and validation manifests in small and large ways. After diving into philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience, it's time to bring this discussion into our everyday lives. After all, what does Julian Sorrell's story and the concept of the pursuit of pleasure have to do with how we live our lives today? We live in an era marked by the culture of instant gratification. Want something to eat? Order it through an app. Want to feel validated? Post on social media and wait for the likes. Want a distraction? Countless movies, series, and games are just a click away. But while these conveniences may offer momentary relief, they also reflect the trap of the relentless pursuit of pleasure. Think about social media, for example. Studies show that every like or positive comment releases dopamine in the brain, the same neurotransmitter associated with rewards like food and sex. But just as Julian Sorrell discovered with his social conquests, this feeling is fleeting. You need more and more to feel the same level of satisfaction. This creates a cycle of psychological dependence, where your happiness always seems just out of reach, conditioned on the next external stimulus. Another everyday example is consumerism. Just as Julian sought social ascension to feel valued, many people today use material goods as a way to measure their worth. The newest car, the latest smartphone, brand name clothes, all become symbols of status. But what happens when the novelty wears off? Like Julian, these people discover that the satisfaction they sought was illusory and that they now need something bigger to fill the void. In the realm of personal relationships, the pursuit of pleasure also manifests itself clearly. In a world where relationships can be started and discarded with a swipe of a finger, human connection is often replaced by the search for momentary experiences. Julian, with his impulsive and manipulative relationships, is a tragic representation of this. He sought love but saw people as tools to achieve his own validation. And what about work? Many of us are conditioned to believe that professional success is the primary path to happiness. But as Julian discovered, the relentless pursuit of status and recognition can leave a trail of exhaustion and dissatisfaction. We work longer hours, sacrifice time with family and friends, all in the name of a reward that often proves insufficient. Finally, there's the impact of this pursuit on mental well-being. Anxiety, stress, and depression are often exacerbated by this endless race for pleasure and validation. Julian is a clear example of how this can be harmful. His obsession with achievements left him emotionally drained, unable to find peace with himself. In our daily lives, what can we do to avoid falling into this trap? While this text isn't intended to offer solutions, we can reflect on what truly brings us happiness. Is it the recognition of others, or the genuine connection with who we are? Is it fleeting pleasure, or the lasting satisfaction of living according to our own values? Julian Sorel never found these answers, but his story leaves us with a powerful warning. Pleasure, when sought without awareness, can become a prison. And in this prison, we often forget to live fully, trapped in an endless race for something that will never be enough. After all, is the pursuit of pleasure truly the path to happiness, or is it just an illusion that distracts us from what really matters? If this video made you reflect and helped you see things differently, don't forget to leave a like. This not only helps me reach more people but also lets me know this resonated with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more reflections like this.